From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Fazende, riding shotgun. Whoa, we don't have Andre Johnson Jr. with us today. We have Madeline Adams of Fox 8 Sports with us today. But before we get into today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, and review. If you are watching us on YouTube, hit that bell notification for when we get the subscribe button and hit the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. And today, we've got another Friday installment of the Overtime Podcast. Andre Johnson Jr. is a best man in his best friend's wedding, so we gave him the day off on this Friday. He's out there leading a toast right now, so enjoy yourself, Andre Johnson Jr. Do not forget about the junior. It's very important to remember the junior. But in his place, we have called in relief, Miss Madeline Adams. Madeline, how are you feeling on this Friday?
Feeling good. It's a Friday, huge weekend. Not just with the Saints, with the Pels too as well. It is going to be an exciting weekend. Really, really excited. Obviously, both of those teams playing at home this weekend. So we got some good football to watch, good basketball to watch, and let's go.
That November-December overlap, it's so crazy because both those sports really go into full swing, and our lives get a little crazier and crazier. And of course, there's a prep scene and everything else with that, with the playoffs starting here in Southeast or in the state of Louisiana. Also, hello to everyone watching us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Glad you have found us here on the new network we have started. I guess it's about a month old, maybe something like that. So glad you have found us on this network. Okay, it is Friday, 2 days away from Sunday, depending on when you watch this podcast. But the Saints face the Browns. The Saints, we've talked about this, obviously, last week. The big story heading into the contest was Darren Rizzy, Merry Christmas. And we've talked about the energy and the passion it showed on the field. This week, we talked again about the Rizzy factor. Is it still very much an issue? Is it still very much a reality? I say absolutely. They are still very much in that window. But Andre Johnson Jr. brought up last pod that interim coaches in their the last 23 interim coaches, only two of them out of the last 23, only two of them got to 2-0 as interim coaches. Just something to watch as we get closer and closer to game time. One thing that will help Rizzy, will help the Saints, and will help their offense is the return of a big man in the middle in Madeline Adams. That's where we're going to go with the big picture today.
Yeah, this is probably, honestly, since week 3, this is probably the healthiest we've seen this Saints offense, which is really exciting to watch. Erik McCoy, as you mentioned, the starting center, back for the first time since week 3. He suffered that groin injury against the Philadelphia Eagles. And honestly, since then, Sean, the offense has just not looked the same. They looked so efficient in the first 2 weeks. And after Erik McCoy went down, you could just noticeably see a difference in this Saints offense. So his injury, I think we've learned this season just how important Erik McCoy is, especially to that offensive line. He should make a huge impact on this game.
No doubt about it, and that's where we're going to go with the big picture here. Because how could we not? I mean, big fella's been gone for a long time. We saw the impact of him not being on the team. So for the first time since week 2, the Saints will have 3 huge pieces of their offense on the field together. Derek Carr, the starting quarterback. Taysom Hill, their most versatile weapon. And now center, and clearly their most valuable lineman, Erik McCoy, the Rock, in the middle. Things have slowly gotten better with the Saints with the return of each one of those 3 players. Taysom missed the Eagles game, if you recall. He wasn't even on the game. He wasn't even playing that game against the Eagles. And then they lost Erik McCoy after the 3rd snap. He returned to Atlanta, played well, then left at halftime, then returned against the Chargers. That was a loss, but if you recall the previous 2 games, it was an absolute mess. Wasn't nearly the bloodbath against the Chargers. They lost by like 18 points, but it's still, they had a lead, which was something they hadn't had the last previous 2 games before that. Then they got Carr back against Carolina. He was clearly rusty, but still, the 3 games without him, with him back, the overall offensive operation was better. He said he was rusty. It was very clear he was. It was a horrific loss that day. We all saw it. We saw what happened after with Dennis Allen. But Carr returned that game, lost. And then last week against Atlanta, looked much better physically, looked much closer to himself, and they were able to eke out that win despite only scoring 20 points. Now they get back Erik McCoy, who only played, like I said, 3 snaps against the Philadelphia Eagles. Like it or not, fair or unfair, he's been the missing link. The offense hasn't been fully the same since he exited that Eagles game very, very early. So it's not like he played 3 games. He played 2 games and 3 snaps.
Right.
So you didn't even have a full drive with Erik McCoy. They were bound to dip a little after those first 2 weeks, where they were averaging over 45 points a game, 45 and a half points a game, just crazy numbers. Yeah. But to plummet to 17 points a game, and it's probably a little lower than that, because if you recall, the Tampa game, they had an interception that set up a very short drive, and they also had a punt return for a touchdown in that game. So it's probably a little bit less. So ask yourself, how much is McCoy worth? If you're going to put a number on it, if you're going to try to quantify it in some way, especially now that the offense has everyone back except Olave and Shaheed. And I don't want to overlook those guys because they are also key cogs in the operation. But truthfully, I expect this offense to get back to their true identity this week, this Sunday against Cleveland, which is outside zone, wide zone, play action, big play. It was so obvious and evident the type of offense they wanted to be in those first 2 games of the season. It was so obvious, and it was working to perfection. Even when we were talking about what it could look like the first couple of weeks of the season, nowhere in our wildest dreams did we think they would put up 47 and 44 points respectively in those first 2 weeks. So I don't think it's going to be that from here on out. It'd be great if it is. I mean, hey, we may maybe talk about our playoff team if that were the case. But I think, back to the original question, how much is McCoy worth? I mean, I think he's worth at least a touchdown, at least a tutty. Yeah. I mean, 7 points. So if they were averaging 17 without him, I think it's reasonable to say you can average 24 with him. Yeah. That's pretty fair, huh? I mean, and then there's the stuff you can't measure. It's that, like, peace of mind, that rock in the middle line of scrimmage gives everyone, really the entire organization, but especially the offense. And make no mistake, the player, when it comes to the offense, that benefits the most with 78 back on the field is old number 4. Yep. Derek Carr, who looked like an MVP candidate in those first 2 weeks when he had his guy up front. Carr has always been this way. Yep. When Carr trusts his protection, he can be lethal. He has got some lethal to his game, but when he doesn't, he can be erratic and jumpy and just all over the place. So, and now I was thinking about this. The Saints, with McCoy back, have now played 4 different centers this season. You've had McCoy, Lucas Patrick, Shane Lemieux, and Connor McGovern. Shout out to McGovern, by the way. I thought he actually held his own last week. Did a nice job at that center position. But that is a lot of turnover at a very, very important position in football, obviously, clearly with the Saints. So I think McCoy, you get that, not just McCoy, but you have McCoy combined with those other 2 players I had mentioned. I think you should expect this offense. Hopefully he's not rusty. Hopefully he's ready to go. And from what they're telling us, last week it would have been pushing it last week. So maybe they gave him the extra week to be ready. So hopefully that's what they're missing. So I think all in all, this is the best possible news you could have as a Saints fan, because I think he was the missing link and clearly the most important lineman on the team. Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, obviously, like you mentioned, his relationship with Derek Carr, they worked so hard during the off season, during the preseason, to really gel and just kind of, when it comes to communication along the offensive line, Erik McCoy is such a key piece. And Darren Rizzy talked about it on Friday. When you have your starter in at center, you have the full playbook. There is nothing that you're leaving out, nothing that you kind of have to simplify. When you have your starter in, it is the entire playbook that you can use and you feel comfortable using. But when you have to put a backup in, that's when you kind of have to simplify some stuff. You know, you kind of can't use the entire playbook. So Erik McCoy being back in there, huge for Derek Carr, huge for Clint Kubiak. Excited to see his return. And you mentioned it, obviously, like we said, this is probably the healthiest we've seen the offense since week 2. But like you mentioned, you can't forget about Derek Carr's top 2 receivers, Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. But I think in the big play factor that Rashid Shaheed brought, it's hard to replace him, but we saw a promise of that return with Marquez Valdez-Scantling in the last game. So that is huge, too, for Derek Carr. There's no doubt. And, you know, a couple weeks ago, I did the sit-down with Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Bright guy, really bright guy. And I straight up told him, I said, you know, when the Saints sign a new player, the first thing I do is I go look at their stats. And the stat that always jumps out to me with you is yards per catch.
Yeah.
And I said, so it's in 1 year he averaged 20 yards a catch. He even said, yeah, I led the league that year in yards per catch. And I said, so are you a big play guy? He goes, this is what I do. I'm a big play guy. Yeah. The difference with him is you think of Rashid Shaheed who can really get downfield, or fast guys like him or Tyreek Hill. They're below 6 feet. Yeah. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is 6'4". I mean, he is. You stand next to him, he is big and fast, and it's not just long strider speed. He is really moving. So he's got a unique sort of frame and a unique sort of skill set. You just wonder how he was available for so long, and it's obvious he's had issues with consistency throughout his career. But right now he's on a hot streak, so hopefully now he's in the good part of that inconsistency. If he's the guy that goes good and bad or hot and cold at certain times. But you said something interesting there as well. Rizzy saying opening up the entire playbook. Man, didn't we see that though? Yeah. The second McCoy went down, it was like, man, this offense looks totally different. And then you throw in Taysom, and then obviously Derek Carr, and then slowly you lose Olave, and then Shaheed. It's amazing how it just slowly was dismantled throughout the weeks, to where you get now and you're like, my goodness, what is this? I got to recalibrate my brain to go back to week 2 when they were just killing guys, throwing deep, running the football, and just being that run first, big play offense that Clint Kubiak was hired to be. It feels like the last 4 or 5 weeks, maybe I'll give him last week. Last week was a little bit better, but it just didn't look the same at all. And I was critical of Kubiak. I'm like, you've got to be able to adjust here, man. Like, injuries are going to happen. But it turns out injuries happened, but they just happened in the spots where they just didn't have adequate guys to replace those players.
Yeah, I think without a doubt the Saints are probably one of the teams in the NFL, the only teams in the NFL that had to deal with that many key injuries all at the same time. We talked a lot about the offense. Let's talk about the defense now. We'll go through kind of the Friday injury report for you. 3 guys listed as out. That's guard Lucas Patrick. 2 guys listed as out. Guard Lucas Patrick and running back Jamal Williams. 6 guys listed questionable. Pete Werner, JT Gray, Erik McCoy, but as we mentioned, Darren Rizzy said he looks like he's good to go. Kool-Aid McKinstry, Cedric Wilson Jr., and Nephi Sewell. Nephi Sewell, Rizzy said, would probably also be a game-time decision. Looks like he's ready to play, but game-time decision. Let's talk about Pete Werner. Starting linebacker. I think he practiced limited today, but did not practice Wednesday or Thursday. How much different is this defense without Pete Werner if he is unable to play?
I think under the radar, Pete Werner's had a good year. Yeah. I think and I thought he had a really good game yesterday. He was flying all over the place. He and DeMario both looked really, really fast. It's like they knew it was coming.
When they're together, when they're playing together, they work so well.
And you see the drop-off when they go to Willie Gay. I don't want to say drop-off, but you could just tell the chemistry's not quite there between Davis and Gay versus Davis and Pete Werner. And Werner is a guy that's just when he knows it's coming or when he trusts his eyes, he is as fast. I don't know what his straight line speed is, but he just gets there. It always feels like he's wrecking the play. And like I said before, DeMario almost had a pick. He felt like he was old DeMario, sideline to sideline yesterday, last week. So I think it's huge. He was Werner being quote unquote limited today. I understand there was a club on his hand today. The last couple weeks it was kind of a wrap. The last couple of days it was kind of a wrap. Maybe he's trying to get acclimated to playing with that club and then see how he reacts to that. A hand is something where can you really re-injure it? I don't know. I guess you could, but it's not like a hamstring where you could re-pull it. I hope he plays because I think they're going to need everyone, and I think there's a little bit of good vibes going on right now, and defensively especially. And you would love to have Werner back. He's one of the, in an organization, it feels like they're in a little bit of flux with young guys you're not sure about and older guys towards the end of their careers. Werner's one of the few guys that feels like he's in his prime. They're rewarding him with the new contract. So hopefully he can go because I honestly think he will eventually ascend to the best linebacker on the team, whether or not at the end of this year or next year. So hopefully he can go because if he can't go, I just don't know about the chemistry between DeMario and Willie Gay. Nephi Sewell's an interesting one. He's a guy that I know they trust, but he hasn't played all year. Right. So I think this could be a bigger injury than perhaps people realize right now.
Yeah, and I mean, last week we saw the defense take a step. At the end of the game, the Saints had to rely on the defense to make a stop. And we saw them do that. We saw them deliver. So the defense took a step last week. Pete Werner was a big part of that. He, like you mentioned, I think he had one of his best games of the year last week, up until that hand injury. And so Darren Rizzy was also asked if he kind of had to have surgery. He said he didn't want to get into all of that. So we are not really sure, I guess, the extent of...
I guess he answered without answer, though, right? It kind of feels like that.
Yeah, we're not sure the extent of this injury or what the risk is of re-injuring it if he does play. So that's obviously a huge injury to keep an eye on, is Pete Werner, because like you said, I think him and Demario Davis obviously been playing together a lot longer than Demario and Willie Gay. So going to be interesting to see if Pete Werner is able to go. Like we said, game time decision according to Darren Rizzy. But I want to go back to the offense just for a second.
Yeah.
We mentioned Lucas Patrick is out, left guard, which, like you mentioned earlier, now what we'll see from the Saints offensive line is kind of what we saw a lot during training camp, what was expected to be the offensive line during the preseason.
Well, right, if Sal DeVeri is your left guard, which looks like he will be, he was last week, this was the starting five to start training camp. It was all in the offseason program and OTAs. And then once training camp started, in probably about 9 practices in, it became pretty evident that they were working Lucas Patrick into that left guard spot. Then Sal DeVeri got injured. And at that point, Patrick was the guy that they had trusted most of that left guard spot. So they actually started the season with Lucas Patrick at left guard. But with Sal DeVeri, maybe he's back on their good graces. Maybe he's kind of earned his way back. I know he's had a little bit of a roller coaster with his own injuries, and he was a guy that, he was benched mid-game during a Kansas City game, I believe, maybe. He was taken out. So there was definitely, he's had some trials and tribulations, and not unlike, the guy at right tackle, Trevor Penning, who we got to say has been fantastic the last couple of weeks, especially last week against Atlanta. So Taliese Fuaga, Nick Saldiveri, Erik McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, Trevor Penning. That was on the Saints board, training camp 2024, team 1 or first team offensive line. That's what it looked like. Yeah. It feels like it's going through like a lot of different shifts and changes and all that. But here we are, week 11? Week 11. And they're back to the original starting 5 they had in training camp. I thought that was interesting symmetry to the season because I had kind of written off Nick Saldiveri. I'm going to be honest with you. I kind of wrote him off because last year he was I think he had a lot of injuries. And this year he was so prevalent at first, and then we didn't hear from him much. And then he kind of lost favor. And then he wasn't like he was the first guy up with a left guard injury either. He was a couple guys back on the depth chart. But nonetheless, good for him. Here he is. But look, they got to play because he's got to play because if you want that offense back you saw week 1 and week 2 with McCoy back, remember they had Lucas Patrick week 1 and week 2. So hopefully Sal DeVeri can at least give you somewhat of what Patrick gave you, and as a unit they can be as productive as they were those first 2 weeks. Yeah,
that'll be huge to watch as well. This offensive line, I think, that was one of the spots where it just kept changing and changing, not only during the games but during the week. So if they can kind of develop some consistency there along the offensive line, obviously I think that affects a large part of the offense. So we'll see what happens. And let's talk about the game now. Cleveland Browns coming in. Darren Rizzy, as you mentioned it, looking for his second win as interim head coach. But a familiar face is coming back to New Orleans. Jameis Winston. He's kind of taken over now for Deshaun Watson as the Browns quarterback. How do you think Jameis's game is going to go? What are we kind of expecting from Jameis Winston? I feel like that's been a storyline all week, Jameis's return to the Superdome. What do you kind of expect from Jameis?
Yeah, and this is probably, under different circumstances, this is probably would have been like our main topic all week. Jameis coming back, because even when that schedule came out, I remember there were a few of us that said, I guarantee you when Cleveland comes to town, Jameis is going to be that starter, because it just felt like Deshaun was on thin ice and then he got hurt, and now here he is. It's so funny the Saints almost ended up with Deshaun Watson. I mean, you were here, right? I mean, they tried everything. I mean, there was about a 6-hour stretch where they thought they had him. They thought they had him signed, sealed, and delivered. Sometimes it works out. The best deals are the ones you don't make. But anyway, back to Jameis's case. How does he react? I think he views New Orleans in a positive light. I think he views the organization in a positive light. I think he views his experience overall in a positive light. I know at one point he was the next guy, and he beat out Taysom in 2021. Then he had the torn ACL. And then I thought he was done at 2022 because that's when they pursued Deshaun Watson, who he's now backing up. God, the symmetry, the how much this league is interconnected is so funny to me. And then, Andy Dalton comes in after he got banged up early in the season and then doesn't give the job back. So clearly he wasn't a guy that DA was overly in love with to be the starter if they felt like Andy Dalton gave him the best chance to win. But I thought at that point, Jameis was as good as gone. But then he came back again after they pursued and got Derek Carr. Something had to keep him here. It probably was the market. It wasn't a whole lot of market for his services to be a starter around the NFL. And maybe this past off season, he felt like it's time to just go be a backup somewhere else. And that's just where I'm at. And we'll see what happens with if someone gets hurt. And lo and behold, it has. So he'll get his best opportunity to start now for the rest of the season. But I think he's going to try to do too much. He's always going to do, even under the most calmest of circumstances. He's going to be back in New Orleans, a place he likes. Teammates he still very much knows, loves, and respects. And they love him. Derek Carr talked highly of him. Tyrann Mathieu talked highly of him. Cam Jordan talked highly of him. But Matthew let something slip when he said, we just got to be there when the time comes. When a ball gets a little throw, when there's an overthrow where he goes a little too strong on a throw, we just got to be there to make the play. They know the opportunities are there with Jameis, but so are the opportunities to kill you with like a 70-yard deep bomb on a rope. So what do you expect from Jameis? I expect Jameis, scatterbrained, all over the place, lovable guy, great energy, but I still think the Saints know how to prepare for him because they had a lot of success against Jameis when he was the quarterback with Tampa, so I think they know how to play him.
Yeah, and look, I think the last time Jameis Winston was in the Superdome, his last play with the Saints was so drama-filled.
Of course.
That victory formation turned into Jamal Williams' touchdown that just had so much buzz and drama around it after the game. Despite that, I think, like you said, Jameis has a lot of love for this city, a lot of love for this fan base. I think this fan base has a lot of love for Jameis. He was kind of one of those players that like Saints fans just gravitated toward. They were very, very loyal to. His fans are very loyal. So I think Jameis, he's going to go in. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets like a standing ovation from the Superdome crowd.
Absolutely.
I don't think that's out of reach. So I think Jameis will be well received by the Saints fans. And yeah, as far as the game, Jameis, like you said, sometimes tries to do a little too much. He can throw the 60-yard touchdown pass and kind of have some of those explosive plays, but sometimes as high as he can be, there will be lows as well.
Yeah.
So
low lows, very low.
Yes, and that's just kind of Jameis's career. There's been some obvious highs, there's been some lows, and so it's going to be interesting to see like how depending on kind of how the game plays out, if Jameis, if they fall behind a little bit, if he's trying to do too much, if he's trying to, if there's a part of him that I would feel like, I would say this is a revenge game for Jameis. I mean,
think
this
so,
is a place where he felt like
he was going to be the guy.
Yeah, that he had an opportunity to be the starting quarterback, to be the next guy for this franchise, and it didn't work out that way. Injuries kind of played a part in that a little bit, and just kind of like you said, I don't think Dennis Allen saw him that way. But so I think this is a little bit of a revenge game for Jameis. So I think he wants to kind of go out there and prove himself to this organization and this franchise, to the Saints I'm talking about. So I think regardless of if, Cleveland finds himself in a deficit or not, I think Jameis will just try to do a little too much. He might, like we said, he might throw the 60-yard touchdown, but I do think he will, make some mistakes through the air as well. Throw a couple picks.
Yeah, if you go back to the 2021 game he got hurt against Tampa Bay, if you go back and really watch that game, it's like it sounds weird to say. It's almost like he was running too fast because he took off and ran a couple times, and that's when he got hurt.
Yeah.
He took that awkward hit from Devin White. It was an ugly play, but you could tell he was jacked up because he was playing Tampa, and I think that might have cost him a little bit. That was a freak play that happened. So if he has that mentality, I think that actually works in the Saints' favor. But I think he's got raw talent and he's capable of winning. He beat the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, look, you can't be any more like you beat the Ravens in your first start when you were like 1-7, and then you lose to the Chargers where you throw 3 horrible picks in the first half. I mean, that is the Jameis experience in a nutshell. So, and you said something there about the Saints fans loving him. I said this when he left. In the grand scheme of things, Jameis started 10 games for the Saints over 4 years. The level of love that he received for a relatively low amount of games played, that's one of the biggest disparities I've ever seen with Who Dat Nation, because they love their guys. There's no doubt about that. But usually it's because they do a lot on the field. But relatively speaking, as a quarterback, Jameis didn't do a whole lot for a starting quarterback on the field. That just goes to show you how much people love his personality. Yeah.
So with kind of a little bit over a minute here. Yeah. Predictions for the game. How do you kind of see this one playing out? Do you feel like Darren Rizzy goes 2-0?
Hey, I think they still got the Rizzy factor. Yeah. I also think low key, they know if they get this one that's 4-7 going into a bye, they really, it's not insurmountable to think they can win more than they lose down the stretch, and maybe you make something out of this season. So I think low key there's a little bit of a, okay, we might be not just win but get back in this thing with the victory. And you add Erik McCoy combined with Jameis, and the Browns are not a great offense. They're just not. They don't score a lot of points. So I don't think the Saints are going to necessarily need to score a lot to win. So I think they're actually going to win fairly comfortably. I hate saying that, but I think it wouldn't shock me if they play really well Sunday.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think the team has just responded really well to Rizzy. I think this game before the bye is so important because you don't want to have that bad taste in your mouth for 2 weeks until you play your next game. So I feel like they're going to respond really well to Rizzy for the second week in a row. I do think that, if you kind of just look at these two offenses, I obviously give the upper hand to the Saints offense. I think the Saints build on their performances offensively and defensively from last week. I think the defense continues to kind of take another step. Obviously, you hope Pete Werner plays. That'll be a big factor in that. But yeah, I just kind of see the Saints building on the momentum from last week, carrying that momentum into the bye week, and then seeing kind of what happens after that.
We'll leave it at that. For Madeline Adams, I'm Sean Fazende. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.